Hello and welcome back to Dev Game Club, a weekly podcast in which two veteran game developers look at games from the past to discuss their relevance and impact today. I'm Brett Duville, and I'm joined as always by my co-host, a man who might now be able to open that secret door in his basement.
Tim Longo. If only I had a basement.
If only you had a basement or a Keyblade, you'd be fine.
A Keyblade. Yeah, that thing's pretty cool.
It is. It opens everything apparently. But not really, and oh boy, we have so much to talk about with this game. The number of notes that I think each of us took is extraordinary. But let's first set up Kingdom Hearts, which is our next game, to coincide with the arrival of Kingdom Hearts 3, which is, when this drops, 2 days from the podcast coming out. It comes out this Friday.
Got it. Okay.
Big deal. Anyway, it arrived in 2002, March, I believe, in Japan, and later in the year here in the States. That's actually when I bought it, although I didn't have time to play it because we were, what were we doing that year? I don't know. Maybe I finished, we had finished Jedi Starfighter. I guess I was just busy. I had young kids, I guess. I never really got around to playing it till a number of years later. Anyway, it has been on a long journey to reach the end of its first story arc this month. It's had numerous sequels and remixes, and I gather from discussions with the Twitch chat that a lot of the series lore is actually outside of the console games at this point. However, it was the first project on which Tetsuya Nomura undertook project direction. He had been a monster and character design on a number of Final Fantasy games up to this point, as well as some other titles such as Parasite Eve, or Ehrgeiz, or The World Ends With You, I think might have come out afterwards, but he kind of bounces all over Square stuff, the bouncer. And he had actually started the company as a debugger all the way back on Final Fantasy IV. He's well known in particular for his work in various art and design roles within the company, particularly character art, and I think you see a lot of that here. But from all my research, it's safe to say that Kingdom Hearts was kind of his baby. It was originally announced at 2001's E3 and received as a massive licensing deal with Disney, which was something truly enormous to consider at the time, and we'll get into that. It was still very much the time of licensing deals in the industry, but that was starting to be on its wane. It was kind of a tentpole to that point of big third-party development, such as at EA especially. The game did quite well commercially and also critically, and obviously it has continued to survive and evolve as a franchise. I want to highlight some other games that came out in 2002. We have played one from this year in Hitman 2, Silent Assassin, one of I think the second game we ever played. But here are some others, and some really interesting titles on consoles in particular. Let's start there. Final Fantasy XI. So the first maybe MMO on a console, certainly one of the earliest, maybe not the first, but a big deal for the PS2. Metroid Prime, Legend of Zelda Wind Waker, Dark Cloud 2, GTA Vice City, Eternal Darkness, Sly Cooper and the Thievious Raccoonus. And then I've got some others that are licensed, because I want to kind of point out, like, this is a year where we're still having a fair amount of licensing. Here's a few just from EA. James Bond and 007 Nightfire. Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets. A couple of Lord of the Rings games. The Two Towers and the Fellowship of the Ring both came out this year, which means to me one of those probably slipped. I guess the Fellowship of the Ring. But other companies were in on that as well. Spider-Man from Activision, Tom Clancy's Splinter Cell, Ubisoft, and that's to say nothing of any sort of sports franchises, which are, even at this point, pretty much annualized. And on the PC this year, you had, as I mentioned, Hitman 2, also one dear to your heart, sir, Warcraft 3.
Oh,
Battlefield 1942, The Elder Scrolls 3 Morrowind, Mafia, Dungeon Siege, Star Wars Jedi Knight 2, Jedi Outcast, what else can we add onto this box? And it was kind of an interesting year. I mean, I look back at those GameCube games in particular, because Metroid Prime was a huge had a huge impact on us. Wind Waker had a huge impact on me. I don't know about you.
Well,
I loved
Battlefield,
Eternal Darkness as well.
Yeah, Eternal Darkness, Battlefield. When you mentioned that, like, it's funny because certain games, when you hear them, like, I have these vivid memories of like what project I was on and my desk that I was, because we were working on Republic Commando at the time, and we would all play,
right?
Battlefield.
And we even played the demo for that as we were finishing Jedi Starfighter, as I recall. There was like a beta out a whole year before with just like one level or something like that.
It was just
and
the
people
first.
played a ton of it. Yeah. So.
That's funny. Yeah, that's an interesting year for sure. Wow.
Yep. Yeah, a lot of interesting years in the industry. But it's funny because I look at the next year for licensing, and like 2002, you heard, several, like 4 EA titles there they mentioned. And that's just kind of the ones that come up quickly when you look, like 2002 in video games. I'm sure there were others. And you go to 2003 and it's like crickets, very few from EA.
Well, I don't know if you remember, but you kind of mentioned this in pre-show, but EA was sort of the worst offender of that problem. That became a part of their business model, and the Lord of the Rings game specifically ended up being sort of the catalyst for a lot of that change because of how much. What ended up, I think, maybe the next year, did Return of the King come out?
Might have been 2 years, but I actually didn't track it down.
And just because we were in the Bay Area, game development scene, and we had friends over there and such, so we knew about it. And it was Two Towers was such an unexpected success.
2003. Yeah, you're right. 2003. Mm-hmm.
Two Towers was such an unexpected success, but EA licensed that. It was done by Stormfront, I believe, who was in Marin, and so, they saw the value, and so they kind of poured a bunch of money into Return of the King, I believe, and then Return of the King ended up being sort of a, I guess, not trying to be too confrontational, but sort of a mismanaged project trying to be done in a very short amount of time, and really like put the team through a lot. And I believe that's around the time that EA Spouse came out as well, and so sort of like license, just get that licensed game out there kind of became the mentality no matter what, because it's going to make its money back no matter how much we put at it, and then it ended up not being the case and sort of just tanked the whole business model, if you will.
It's not one of the ones that when you look up 2003 in video games, licensed titles do not rise to the top like they did in prior years. I looked at a few years kind of around this time just to try to recollect whether this is what I remembered of the time. And if I was correct, like, was this really a deal? And it was, although I think by 2001 and 2002, we were definitely having the conversations of like, well, when, how do you use a license well? Of course, a very personal question to us because, we're working on Star Wars at the time. So we're just like, how do you work in this universe somebody else has created and make something good about that, good with that, without just trying to do a play the movie game, which often doesn't adapt well. That's something Daron Stinnett talked about when we talked to him last year, that playing the movie of Star Wars is not necessarily going to be a success. So how do you find those elements that you can repurpose? And a lot of the model had been, especially at EA, find a way to make a play the movie game. And I think that was starting to not work out so well. I mean, I think the Spider-Mans and the other superheroes are a little bit different in that you kind of have built-in mechanics there, and of course a huge comic history that you can draw on, so you don't have to simply follow the movie. Not that that's, it can't also be a model for success, as it was with Spider-Man 2 in like 2004 or 5. So anyway.
Well, and then, I mean, because of this licensed sort of dark period that ended up happening after people, it's the land grab mentality, right? It's like, oh, these are making a lot of money. Let's do them with, like you said, play the movie games or whatever, put in, a lot of money, but do it in a short amount of time. And so not worry about quality as much. And it sort of ended up creating this dark ages for licensed games. And I feel like for many years after that, I feel like maybe until even Arkham, surfaced,
Right.
did licensed game become, a thing again, because people sort of were afraid of that problem of what is a good licensed game.
Yeah.
Even
Yeah,
Lucas
and it was.
continued to
I mean,
struggle with it with
yeah, for sure.
indie and Force Unleashed and stuff, right? Had ups and downs and such, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, often I think that the gaming audience often saw these as pretty cynical and cash grabby.
Right.
Trying to ride those coattails of a big movie release when it's very. I mean, and one of the issues was trying to get those games out so that they were current with a movie coming out, which is a really difficult thing to do. I mean, it's hard to really, especially as movies became more and more sort of post-production done on them, it became harder and harder to be able to match your game to what the movie was going to be about, because you might not know what the movie was really about until very imminently before it was actually out, both for reasons of secrecy, as far as the studio went, but also just because they were still making it in post-production, through effects and things like that. So it was also getting harder and harder to match the movie as well.
Yeah.
So
schedules just never lined up.
It really never did. Yeah.
They're just two different mediums, and and that's why I think the Arkham approach ended up being that more modern catalyst for a positive change in licensed game, because they completely took the different approach where they're not trying to follow anything. They're just making a licensed product in their own vision, their own version, and universe of Batman, but it's still Batman's. You still feel like it is, but it's got a freshness to it. And I feel like ever since then, licensed stuff has been popping back up here and there, but it's not trying to follow any particular thing.
Right.
There's so much Marvel success in the movie space right now, but you don't see games coming out to try to copy those movies, so.
Right. Right. That would have been, if the Marvel Cinematic Universe had existed in 1999 and 2000, we would have been having 2 movies a year made by EA Studios, whether an additional party or something that they owned,
2 games
trying to get those things out, based on Marvel Cinematic Universe properties.
Yeah, exactly.
Basically, we have 2 movies a year, right? 2 or 3 movies a year, I guess. And that's what would have happened. Okay, So you take that environment, and then I want to step back a little bit, because now you're adding Disney, and I want to talk a little bit about our own history with Disney, because we are probably older than a substantial amount of our audience, or at least, we certainly heard that from the Pokemon podcast series.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I was playing this when I was 10 or whatever. And for us, and for me in particular, I can remember that for me, seeing a Disney movie growing up was a huge event, because there was no VCR. I don't think we had a VCR in my house until 82 or 83 at the earliest. And maybe later, because they were expensive, and we didn't have a lot of spare cash lying around for things like that. And they were very expensive for years. So the way I saw them were on, in drive-ins, which are not even a thing anymore. I can remember seeing Pinocchio in a drive-in. I can remember that might be the earliest one I can remember seeing in a drive-in. And they were coming out in theaters on whatever schedule Disney wanted to re-release them. And so it was, for me, a really special thing to be able to see a Disney movie growing up, particularly when I was very little, because we would have to go out as a family, 5 of us, already expensive. Like I said, we were not rich. And so it was really kind of a big deal, a big event. We'd see, Lady and the Tramp, and Sleeping Beauty, and Cinderella. I can remember seeing all of these with really terrible audio in a drive-in when I was growing up. What was your interaction with them?
Yeah, similar. Yeah. It was definitely that. We probably less drive-in for us, but just because there weren't that many around. But it was the local theater, tiny theater, old theater, and it was just sort of those sort of matinee mentality, right, where you go with the family or just with some friends or something, and it was just that was the only availability. So it was a big event, and it was, and the interesting thing for me that just starting this game off, not to jump ahead, but the characters that you immediately start interacting with are more like the Goofy and the Donald and stuff. Are not from the feature films, right? So I actually never had much of a connection to like their core cast as much as I did with casts from the actual films, because I would really mostly go to see the films and stuff. They were, those characters are mainly from the cartoons and stuff. So I had a little bit of relationship with, because they did have the cartoons that were on TV occasionally, right? The short cartoons.
Right. The Wide World of Disney, for example, on
Sunday
nights.
Right. Yeah. So those
they play like a short maybe or something like that.
Yep.
Yeah.
Just regular cartoons, right? Just short cartoons, just like Warner Brothers did as well with Bugs Bunny and stuff. And so I had some relationship there, but I never really got into those as much as I did the Warner Brothers stuff for whatever reason. So the movies were the main one. So like for Donald and Goofy, I don't have much of an affinity for. But as we start getting into the lands, the different locations you're going, I think that will. We've only gone to one, but I think that will start getting me even more excited and interested. And to your point, like as a sort of young adult, I remember, I don't know. I remember if I was with Jen, with my wife yet or not, but I remember Little Mermaid coming out as well. And that being such a huge event because Disney from a feature film perspective kind of took a hiatus, is my memory. For many years, they weren't doing a lot of feature films, and then The Little Mermaid was sort of like almost a reboot of them doing them on a regular basis. And it was just, the score was amazing, and it was just kind of blowing your minds. And then, of course, from there you get Aladdin, you get Lion King, you get Beauty and the Beast, some of these modern ones, right? That kind of are partners. And in fact, in this game, you see both the old era stuff with Snow White, and just mentions of Snow White, and then Belle as well from Beauty and the Beast. So
and I think that the other thing too is that that sort of fallow period that you're mentioning, although they did have films at that time, I think a lot of them didn't have kind of the Disney magic with, in particular, musical numbers or singing numbers, I should say.
That's probably what it was. It was just they weren't doing.
I think that was a big part of it.
Yeah, because they had. Mencken,
Great Mouse Detective and things like that. Yeah, but there was no Robin Hood or whatever.
Right. They brought in some heavy Broadway talent to write for
for Mermaid
and those. Yeah,
and going forward. And it's kind of interesting because looking at the game itself, it's funny. It's a good point you make about sort of your connection with Mickey and Donald and Goofy, because I certainly knew who Donald and Goofy were, but like I don't really have a good sense of how I know that.
Yeah, they were never in feature films, right? They were always.
Right. The Goofy was in the Goofy movie, but that's much later. That's.
I mean, they probably had some, but not as big a deal as the Little Mermaid or something, right? They were they're sort of like core cast members, if you will, that were sort of mascots, right? In a way, that were always coming from the short cartoons that were just played on TV. But I don't know. I feel like when you say Disney today, everyone knows Mickey, of course, right? Because he's the sort of iconic aspect of it, but.
Yeah, quite literally.
This game is a really good example of what really Disney means to most people, and that is those big films, right? And those characters that come from there more than their mascots. Which it's just fun. And, they're definitely the hardcore, probably. Who were really Disney hardcore, really have an affinity for those classic characters, but. Even the Pixar stuff now, right, is more synonymous for a lot of younger people of what Disney is. Mickey is kind of this old,
old school. Well, but on the other hand, though, so the other impact Disney had on me, probably now moving to more like the early 80s, 82, 83 probably is the first time that we went to Disney World in Florida.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you would have been going to Disneyland at the same time.
Okay. We're still big fans of Disneyland. Yeah.
Oh, I'm sure you are. So you would go there and everybody would buy the hat right? And the mascots would be around, and so that might actually be sort of my first, other than the cartoons which I would have seen on TV, but that I honestly have no recollection of. I can remember, like I said, I can remember Pinocchio the first time I saw that, or Cinderella or what have you, but I don't remember the first time I saw Mickey Mouse or Donald Duck.
Yeah.
And I feel like that was a big part of my exposure to those characters, was going to the parks.
Yeah, I agree. So. I mean, and in that context, you don't really get a sense of their character very much, right? It's just you see a mascot and you see the artwork and the iconography, but you don't really, it's very, very minimal, right? You're not watching.
Right. You don't get a good sense of the character. Movie. They're not speaking. Well, Mickey probably spoke, but I don't know if they spoke to the degree. I don't really remember, because I was all about the rides, man. Anyway, I think it's it's something we talked about in pre-show, is that part of the reason to talk about what Disney means to us growing up when we did is that Tetsuya Nomura also grew up when we did. He was born just a couple months before I was, in 1970, late 1970, and he would have grown up in much the same way, I have to imagine, right? I mean, I don't even know to what degree Disney movies, how they were seen in Japan. Obviously, I have no viewpoint into that, but his sort of exposure to it had to have been kind of similar. That it was kind of formative for him. I found reference of him sort of taking on the project after having overheard conversations between Sakaguchi and I can't remember who else. Hashimoto about what it would be like to have Mickey Mouse in a game. How would you do a Mickey Mouse game? And it's just wild to me that this thing came together out of things like that. They were talking about Super Mario 64 and how you convert sort of these characters into 3D, and it's just interesting to me. And then the final piece that's a little strange, and we can start getting into the game proper at this point, is that the first lands that you go to are not the first lands I think of. Like, I still think I haven't seen Alice in Wonderland.
Yeah, right.
Although I'm familiar with it, I certainly recognize, obviously the character is very recognizable, but that's also crosses over with Lewis Carroll, obviously. But I don't know that I ever saw that movie. So it's kind of like, oh, but maybe that's a big one in Japan. Maybe that's one that made it there at a different time or something like that. And then Hercules, which I only saw when my kids were little, right? And so I don't know.
Oh, is that the second one?
That's going to be the next place.
Yeah.
I don't think you have to go there next. There's kind of
weird.
There's some branching as well. This structural stuff I think we'll talk about more going forward, because there's various branching and things like that, and the order is not necessarily predetermined. But yeah, let's dive into sort of the beginning of this game, because I think the beginning of this game contains my first real criticism of the game, and that's, who is this Sora guy?
I don't know what the heck's going on. I mean, the opening, I just was sitting there wide-eyed with my mouth open, like, what is happening? It's like, and I'm sure that fans will yell at their pod listening device when I say this, but the opening to me feels almost like they don't know either. It's so kind of open to.
I mean, be more specific. What is it that you go, huh?
Well, I think specific. It's multiple sections, but the specific section I'm talking about right now is the opening of just showing Sora in the sort of darkness and the very vague.
Okay, that abstract space.
Abstract.
Where you're making some choices about basically your character.
Well, there's that, but even before that, even in the cinematic, it's just him falling.
Oh, right. Yes. Yeah. Okay. Yeah,
and then landing on a beach, and then what's his name is in the ocean, and then what's her name is behind him, and then there's more blackness, and he's falling.
Riku, Kairi.
It's just, and then he wakes up and then he falls again, and then there's more blackness, and he's looking, he doesn't know what's going on, and then he wakes up on a beach. You know what I mean? And then that chin turns out to be, and then you go to the tutorial, like you said, or whatever that is, and then you're kind of like, you're on these stained glass, structures of showing the princesses, and then you make some choices there, like you said, and those may be a little bit more gamey, and I understand because they want you to kind of abstractly make some choices and train you on a couple simple things, so
right.
Maybe I bite a little bit more, but if by the end of this game they bring this I'll declare this now because I don't know, you've played it before so you don't give it away, but if they by the end of this game bring this stuff together for me and I get it and I'm like, oh, and I have some revelations. Like, I feel like there were definitely moments in Final Fantasy IX where I got some of that. There are definitely some crazy stuff at the end of that game too, where I'm like, what? Come on. This is not a thing. But there definitely were some, especially with each of the character storylines in Final Fantasy IX, which sort of paid off in certain ways, which was cool. If they, sorry about the noise, if they achieve that for this, then I'll be impressed. But as of right now, I'm highly skeptical that they can bring all of this craziness together. An example, well, I have one clue that I'll throw out here now too, and again, don't react, but there is one shot in the beginning that shows Sora on his bed, on a bed, and then he gets up and he runs off because he hears something or sees something, and then they cut or something, and then they show an empty bedroom, and then it sounds like his mom is yelling for him, and it looks like a normal modern day kid's bedroom at that point.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the only thing they show of that, and then they go on.
Yeah,
and I'm like, what was that?
That is not what you think it is, and it is not explained apparently in the first game what that is.
Oh, jeez.
But it is explained subsequently, like
really?
What's going on in that scene.
Like,
in sequels.
Games?
Yes.
Oh my goodness. See, that's okay. Well,
yeah.
Anyway, so that's an example of
because I am responding to that because I got to that point too, having played it and gone, what is this about? Like, I don't even remember this, because I think that's literally the only time that's part of it at all.
Huh.
And the thing is that they don't actually live on the island, I guess.
I feel like it's a common trope to have the island be a metaphor for something else.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, even then, I'm like, well, where do they like?
Well, it's called Destiny Island, right? Or something.
Yeah.
Like, I feel like it has something to do with a physical manifestation of what they're meant to do or be or something. I don't know. Or for him, maybe it's just all in his head. If it ends up being kind of one of those, it's all in my head kind of things, I guess. I don't know. I will definitely admit that it's fascinating me and intriguing me, but baffling me as well, and I guess I'm just surprised at how, and I don't mean this in like a positive or negative way, but how Final Fantasy it actually is to me so far.
Right. Yeah, I mean, and that is probably, and it's not a criticism I'm going to dwell on across the series. That is probably my biggest criticism, is that I don't really care about Sora.
Oh, yeah.
I get it that he's like my player, he's my stand-in for me. Like, I'm supposed to maybe imagine myself as a kid if I was having an adventure like this, but they're bringing in characters, and you wouldn't necessarily know this because you don't play these games, but Waka, the guy who has the soccer ball, and Tidus, who I always pronounce Titus, those are Final Fantasy X characters.
Oh, what?
That have been reimagined for as far as looks go, and are in this game.
Well, there was also a Cid
on the island.
There
was also a Cid when you get to Traverse Town. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I don't know if Kairi and Riku, I don't know who the other characters are. There are characters from The World Ends With You in this as well.
What is happening?
Yeah. I know, right? And so it's like, I remember at the time at the E3 that this was announced, us all being like, what? I mean, Square doing big JRPG with Disney characters, like all these Disney worlds, because they showed, I think, a fair amount of like what you were going to be able to be in, like the environments, the characters you're going to meet, and being like, wow, like just
so
only a big JRPG company like that could maybe pull this off in some way.
Well, that's that's the thing, is like this is like a fever dream of a project, right? In a kind of a positive way. Like, it's just crazy that it was even conceived. But now that you mention that, I guess, again, this is going to be sort of like Pokemon for me, and the audience is probably like, they all know this stuff, but I'm just kind of on the flying it. But if those are from different games, then I guess it's obvious to say that what they're doing is shown, because it seems like the whole theme of this is you're going to be going around to different worlds, and worlds are blending and colliding, and the stars are going out, which means a world is going away or something like that. And so that would make sense that if they're doing that across Disney's worlds, then they would do that across their own worlds as well. You know what I mean? Right. Even though they're not directly connected, like Aladdin and Beauty and the Beast are not connected, but they could show up in this game together. Because it's a interdimensional story or something. Right. So I guess that kind of makes sense that different, World Ends With You. I don't know that game. I don't know if World Ends With You is actually a Final Fantasy game or not, or if it's its own thing.
It's not a Final Fantasy game, but it is a Square JRPG.
Yeah, so it's like they're kind of saying they have the sort of same catalog as Disney, and so they're going to have their characters coming and going or something.
Yeah, but to me, I mean, that for me is probably the bridge too far for this game. Is just I didn't at the time. I love Final Fantasy games.
That's what I'm surprised by. Yeah,
but it's not as core to me as a human being as Disney is, right? Yeah, it's like for me, like I've said, Pinocchio, or even Mary Poppins, or Cinderella, or what have you. I mean, all these classic Disney movies are like, I remember like what an impact they had for me to see them when I did.
Sure.
And of course, all the Final Fantasy stuff I played as a professional, like not even just as an adult, but like I was working. I had children by the time I started playing the JRPGs. Mm-hmm. So for me, it's like, it's hard for me to find the entry point into not only the JRPG aspect of this with the JRPG characters from the Final Fantasy and whatever other Square things, but also a new character.
Yeah.
I'm just like, what? Why?
Well, but I mean, maybe that's kind of the point, that it's not for us, or it's not for I mean, like,
and that's why I don't want to dwell on it, like, for,
because you can imagine a kid who did grow up with that stuff and grew up with Disney. It could be blowing their minds, and especially in Japan, right? It could be also really,
that's true.
It's big in Japan, and so to have that, somebody who's played Square games their whole life, and then having the worlds collide, to some degree, you could say it's almost a brilliant move for Square, right? Because it's introducing, for Disney fans, it's introducing these other characters to them that they've never seen. But then for people who like both, it's like this perfect merger of, I don't know. I'm trying to think of another example, like Marvel versus Capcom or something like that. I don't know.
It's hard for me to find another analogy either, because this is such a uniquely strange game in that way.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, it's, it is some crazy stuff. And I guess my worry, and I guess to go back to my points about the opening and basically what we've played up to this point, up to Wonderland, my worry is, because of this sort of interdimensional, multi-world, multiverse kind of story that they have, that the opening is kind of a clue, or a foreshadowing, no pun intended, of what the story really is, all it can be, because they've chosen to kind of have a multi-IP, multi-franchise merger, and so thus they kind of have to make it so vague and so general and so watered down that they can't really focus too much. And Sora, kind of in a way, ultimately ends up having to, he can't be interesting, because he has to be so, they have to go to all these places and kind of be neutral about it. So therefore, I guess I'm just worried that it just won't go any place because it can't. but
Right.
I hope.
Yeah, and I
I
think
hope
there's
I'm wrong
also
on that.
yeah, I think there's also gameplay reasons to have another character, right? And we will talk about the action combat next time because we'll have played more of it and we'll start having settled into it. There's not really tons of it in this part, anyways. A lot of it's optional, at least in the tutorial area or the Destiny Island area. So you don't necessarily have to do it, and it's there a lot more as you get into Traverse Town and the Alice in Wonderland land, whatever we should call world,
Wonderland,
Wonderland world. But so we'll get into that even more next time. But the last thing that we wanted to touch on was going to Traverse Town and the sort of breadcrumbing that you talked about in pre-show.
Yeah, I mean, one of my pet peeves that I feel like by 2002 should, I don't know, I guess maybe it's a little bit early to find the sort of usability holes here, but I feel like by 2002 should really be a solved problem. Though, I'm probably guilty of it before that, after that myself. So I can't really call them out too much maybe, but to give you an example, I was running around. They don't give you a lot of direction, basically, right? There's no objectives, there's no map, there's no really focus. And the breadcrumbing that they do is either nothing or kind of like, basically I kind of was wandering around for a while, not knowing where I was supposed to go, and then ultimately triggered the next step by going through one door that I didn't know I had to go through, and so they're basically...
Or that you even weren't allowed to go through until you had done something else.
Yeah.
So there's some like story ordering that like, oh, you have to talk to Sid.
Yeah.
Before you can go through this door. Why?
Yeah. Right.
We don't know.
Yeah.
Like I still don't know.
Yeah.
And they trigger little cutscenes that sort of, I guess, if you knew that's what they were doing, you would go, oh, something has changed because now I'm seeing this other thing. But it does that. None of that is communicated well to the player.
No. The opacity of that and the, and the sort of arbitrary feel of it, So I ended up spending, I think, way more time both in on Destiny Island. Is that what it's called? Destiny Island?
I think that's right. I didn't write it down, but I think you're right.
Yeah, and Traverse Town both was me kind of wandering. Not only was I looking for freaking coconuts and stuff like that, I'm just like,
oh boy.
Mm-hmm. With full disclosure, I did look up the coconuts. I
had somebody tell me in the stream
because
you can just
but see, that's not a taught mechanic, right? That's
right.
That you even can hit trees and that things will fall from them. So, obviously it's a coconut tree, so maybe I would have gotten there eventually, but
no, I mean, the thing is you knock down the coconuts and I'm like, oh, I knocked down some coconuts. Oh, I can't pick up these coconuts. No, you need some other coconuts.
Right. There's even negative.
That's the part that I was like, like, oh, I can, and I started climbing every tree. I mean, there's some real troubles here in the early going, and this is in the first two main worlds, right? Destiny Islands and Traverse Town, where you're lost. The quests that you have are impossible or ridiculous. So, I mean, you have that little chase that you have to do with Riku. I mean, there's no way you're going to beat that race with the controls that you have.
No.
Like, no way. Like, you haven't had enough of the game to be able to do something like that effectively. I mean, I'm sure there are players who can do it, but I didn't do it the first time I played it, and I didn't do it this time.
Yeah.
I got there pretty well, and then coming back, I was all over the place. Because there's all kinds of traps on the way. I mean, there's a lot of weird choices in this early going that you're just like, what on earth?
Yeah.
The
little bit of flashbackiness that I had from Final Fantasy IX that I guess should have dawned on me, but from a game construction perspective, that makes sense now is, I guess I didn't realize how kind of level based and linear the game was going to be, in that, it's very, and now it's the same in Wonderland, that it's very, Yeah, just linear and puzzle based and
Yeah, adventure gamey and
order based. Yeah, adventure gaming and one offy as well.
yeah,
Like we talked about a lot with Final Fantasy IX. That's a bit of a sort of dev culture difference in some ways. That there's very much a custom content and custom code and scripting that goes to specific moments and events that you will only use that one time. I'm thinking of like the when you're getting the evidence for Alice and you're in that one lily pad room or whatever, and
yeah.
there's some specific things that are only probably in that room, um, and it's just a different kind of mentality. But yeah, it's very adventure gamey. But I guess I didn't know that this game was going to be like that. So that's kind of catching me off guard as well.
Well, now that you've seen it, you'll be better placed to deal with it in the future, because that is pretty much what's going to be happening
the whole time,
the whole game. Each world has sort of a central series of story based puzzles and or navigations that you're going to have to do to get through.
God, what a weird, it's a very fascinating game. The combat we'll talk about next time, but merging all that with the combat that they have is also, and then your companions, which are real-time AI, it's just the craziest, almost like an experiment or something.
It really is. It is off the wall. It's absolutely off the wall.
It's something else.
Yeah. All right, let's put a pin in it there, take a break and come back and do some feedback.
Sounds good.
Welcome back from the break. We are still making our way through some feedback from our Pokemon episodes, and we are starting to get into New Kingdom Hearts. I don't know if we'll quite get to that this time. In any case, people are sending in feedback to devgameclub@gmail.com, and you, sir, have the first one from John.
Subject is the wizardry and lasting legacy of the Game Boy, from John Lethbridge. Brett and Tim, long time, first time here. He says that isn't his real name, but I think it's actually his real name. Hi, long time, first time. While I missed the Pokemon craze when it kicked off, being a bit older than the target audience, I've been enjoying listening to you play through and discover the game's secrets. I've played only a little of Red, Blue, and it never really got its hooks into me. Partially, I feel, because by then I had played several core JRPGs, like various Final Fantasies, the Chrono Trigger spanning the NES, Game Boy, and SNES. The kid-friendly veneer and relatively late release of the Game Boy's life cycle. I was a classic DMG gray brick kid. Meant that my late teenage self felt I had better things to do. That said, when I heard Brett digging into the technical specs of one of my all-time favorite consoles, and probably the one I logged the most hours on, I had to write in. A few years ago, I ran across the Game Boy Programming Manual, in quotes, a link in the show notes, online, and felt compelled to explore it. While I am a designer, I have a technical background and enjoy diving into the minutiae of the system. Seeing what was available through the hardware and the games that were produced on the platform was both surprising and inspiring. I decided to look into the background of a few of my favorite Game Boy games to see what secrets they were harboring, and I wasn't disappointed. First off, Link's Awakening. It's one of my favorite Zelda games, personally. That's Tim speaking. 1993, the Game Boy follow-up to the SNES Link to the Past has a very interesting origin as after-hours project, which eventually ended up reassembling the Link to the Past team to make the game, and was built using one of the first Game Boy dev kits. That it pushed forward the evolution of the franchise and remains one of the system's best games to date is a true achievement. That's awesome to hear. For Metroid 2, which was in 1991, also a great game, pioneered, among other things, the shape change of Samus's suit with the Varia. I always mispronounce that.
Yep.
Upgrade. Because the Game Boy's limited color palette couldn't adequately communicate a color change clearly, they had to alter the shape of her suit to telegraph the upgrade, unlike the NES version where Samus's sprite is palette swapped. Who knows what Samus's suit would look like today if not for this great game? Wow, that's a really good one.
Yeah, that's a terrific poll, because when you only have that palette, you really have to use shape language a lot more, and something probably we should have talked about with Pokemon. Well, and then all the differences between the different Pokemon themselves.
Yeah, totally. That's a good thing you don't really think about. And to his point about Metroid specifically, having just finished, Return of Samus, which is a remake of Metroid 2. Like he said, some of the shape language that is now just we take for granted in every Metroid game is coming from that game, which I just didn't know. That's awesome. I think maybe his last example here, Final Fantasy Adventure, which I haven't played, 1991, is a top-down ARPG. What does that mean?
Action
RPG. Okay.
Asian.
Okay, yeah, there you go. Which featured a sprawling open world map, multiple companions with unique abilities, multiple weapons with 2 unique special attacks each, along with a magic system featuring multiple spells and an epic soundtrack. How all this got crammed into one little cart early in the system's life cycle is a feat of engineering that is too often unrecognized. Oh, and being the game that created the Secret Mana series is worthy note too. Jeez. This is just a small sampling of the system's impressive library. I could go on, but instead, I'd like to briefly extol the virtues of 2018's Minute. Ah, yes, I just put this on my playlist. I want to play this.
Yeah,
this charming lo-fi adventure feels like it would have been right at home on the Game Boy, and yet evolves the design of top-down games in very interesting ways. There are a lot of words already written on the subject around the internet, but I felt the need to highlight this absolute gem of a title. To wrap up and relate to the current series of podcasts, I am finally diving into a Pokemon game. My kids got Pokemon Let's Go Pikachu for Christmas, and while my son is gleefully tearing through it on his own, my daughters are still a bit young to play alone, so instead we play together. The tone of the game makes it a joy to play. My daughters revel in the idea of finding some new friends, as they put it, since you no longer need to battle early Pokemon to capture them. Every time we play, we're playing with a girl trainer because representation is important, though I have a different email and story to relate on that topic another time. And we've named our rival Rump. Okay. Wow, that's really sticking it to the rival there. It's all around just good time for everyone when we play. Even this simplified control scheme using the Pokeball controller was unexpected, but has been surprisingly refreshing. Anyway, I'll cap the mail here. Looking forward to hearing what you're playing next and hearing if Tim managed to get all 7 badges and finish the game in time. Or the geez of defeat. I did it. Did it.
You did it. Yes. This came in before we finished it, but yeah.
Yeah, but I did do it. I wasn't going to not finish that one. So, wow, great mail.
Yeah, no, it's a lot of good stuff in there. I loved having all these sort of different games, especially from so early in the system. The DMG refers to the initial the very first Game Boy, that real thick big one.
I still have mine.
Yeah, I know you do. But that's what that means.
Got it. Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, these are some early titles in that system, and they are a huge deal. And yeah, I agree with you. Minute is one of those ones that came up a lot in sort of end of the year discussion, where I'm like, oh yeah, that was one I meant to get to.
Yeah, and it was
relatively few games last year.
It was made by. What did they work on?
John Willem, who works at Vlambeer.
Vlambeer, that's right.
Yeah,
that's right.
It's but it's not made by Vlambeer. It's made
no.
Right. It's the designer rather. I don't know who did the programming, but it wasn't Rami.
Yeah, right. Cool.
It's John. What is John Willem's name? Now I'm feeling bad. Anyway, I like naming the guy the guy Rump as well, because I assume that's he's wearing a "Make Kanto Great Again" hat or something like that.
That's funny. Yeah,
Yeah,
actually,
John William Nyman. Yeah, so John Willem.
Okay.
People normally call him John Willem or JW. Anyway.
Oh, that's right, JW. That's what he goes by. That's
Yeah.
right. Yeah, I actually am also playing a girl protagonist in my Pokemon Let's Go because I can. And,
Good.
And even though I'm not playing with my 16-year-old daughter, unfortunately, she'll probably never play it. But it's just we talked about it a little tiny bit when we played the series, and I was just glad that they did it. So, yeah.
Yeah, kudos for sure. All right, I have one from Jesse Morgan, Sea of Morgan on the stream. Programming Pokemon. Hey, Brett and Tim. I love the series on Pokemon. I was 10 or 11 when Red and Blue came out, and so I was a first-gen lover of the series. I'm glad that after all of this time, the charm still comes through for newcomers. The series has grown a lot in scale, but not changed much structurally. Each new game after Red and Blue added systems, depth, and new monsters, but the overall structure didn't change much. It was always 8 different gyms of various types over different cities until you got to the Elite Four. To that point, it really blew my mind to hear that a lot of the game design choices that went on to define the series for so long were born out of hardware limitations. Just goes to show that the best innovation often emerges from overcoming restrictions. Yes, side note here, one of the things we used to say, going all the way back to Starfighter, was constraints inspire creativity.
Yeah.
That all changed with the most recent editions, Sun and Moon, which finally tried a lot of new things structurally to great success. The gym leader encounter equivalents became less about Pokemon battles and more about taking on mini challenges within the universe. It also tied the narrative into the gameplay more overall, and I think it was a big step forward for the series. If you guys decide to play another one, I highly recommend it, as it brought me back to the series. Anyway, on your last episode, you talked again about the challenges of programming for the Game Boy, and it reminded me of this fun little tidbit I read a while back. Well, I'll let you read through it for the details, but the gist is that midway through development on Gold and Silver, they realized they needed to add another whole region to the game, but didn't have room for it on the cart. They were in a panic, and the game almost didn't make the scope. In stepped the late great Nintendo president Satoru Iwata, who at the time was president of HAL Laboratories. He was able to single-handedly write a program that condensed the code enough for them to easily add another region to the cartridge. Just a great example, not only of the way truly knowing a hardware platform can radically change what you can get out of it, but also of the greatness that was Mr. Iwata. It's rare to find a company president who can lead and work in the trenches along with the rest of the team. As always, thanks for putting so much effort into this great show, Jesse. So that is a link on Kotaku, and I'll put that in the show notes, of course.
Yeah. Yeah, that's not the only Iwata story, too.
There are many. Yeah.
And
if you go back and watch the Iwata Asks series, there's a million tiny little gems in there because a lot of the people he ends up talking to, and that was Nintendo, I guess for the Wii, maybe was those interviews.
It was after.
It was after the Wii, but it was kind of in. But no, it kept going. Yeah, I didn't mean to say it was just like just right when the Wii came out, but it was like it started around that time. And there were these videos on the Nintendo site, and you could go watch Iwata Asks, and he talked to different developers, and often they had long-term relationships, and there's a ton of little tidbits in there as well. So I'd recommend those to people. All right, we have a short one for you.
And what was I gonna mention? He was referencing just kind of piggybacking off of his email about sort of the charm that we're finding in it, or we found in Pokemon. The interesting note that I wrote down related to Kingdom Hearts is I'm wondering if one of the reasons I enjoyed Pokemon so much is the relatability, even though it was just, Game Boy pixels, the relatability of this sort of setting and characters and stuff versus I'm just continuing to do some soul searching on my JRPG perspective, and playing a little kid who like wakes up in a house, and is going on adventures. I just kind of fell into very easily, and Sora and just kind of everything going on there is just harder for me to get into for some reason. So I was trying to figure out what the differences were, but we'll come back to that.
Yeah, no, I think that's also like that ties in for you to Zelda.
Yeah.
Like every Zelda basically starts that way, right?
Yeah, and I think I think Zelda is enough of a, I don't know what, fantasy,
Well, sure,
but
action
like
adventure exploring. Yeah,
mythology.
I mean, yeah, sure.
It's like a hero's journey. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
Versus, I think a lot of JRPGs have their own milieu, if you will, or whatever. Their own sort of like construct. Final Fantasy IX, I thought, they created their own world that I really enjoyed, but you had to get into it. There's
Hmm.
no like connection to it. I mean, there may
Right.
be for
Yeah.
people who played all the previous games, but
Well, no, I mean, I wouldn't even say that's. I mean, a lot of the characters recur, like you mentioned, Sid already. I think that's an interesting point. Is that um, there's a definitely the characters are grounded in the world, but you are not, and so you're finding out about this world, and they already know about it. So there's like this remove from you and the character,
yeah, exactly. You're
right?
not right.
you don't
Yeah,
you don't know, like you play
there's a
Final
dissonance
Fantasy
there.
7 and Cloud Strife is doing whatever his eco-terrorism, whatever. I don't even remember what he's doing at the beginning. Maybe he's criminal or something. I don't really remember.
A game
um
about eco-terrorism?
well, I guess that's maybe where he ends up. Actually, it's not him, it's the group he meets up with, I guess.
Huh.
um
Wow.
but it's like, why, like, you don't know,
Yeah.
like, what is going on. You're just kind of thrust, and that's not necessarily a bad storytelling technique, but it does for a thing
It's
where
just
you're supposed
harder
to have it. Yeah, this character's supposed to
to relate.
represent you, right?
Yeah.
And it's just hard to make those relationships. It can work in a novel, and I think sometimes it doesn't work as well at the beginning of some of these games. But yeah,
Yeah.
it's definitely an interesting point.
Anyway,
Okay.
so short one here. Subject is autosaves from Raymond. Maybe his real name. Hi, are we so used to the autosave prompt when starting modern games that even when the prompt isn't there, in the case of Let's Go, we just assume it was since we just glaze over when we see the prompt in any case? Regards, Raymond.
Yeah, so I mean, this was, I guess, to the point of Pokemon Let's Go not having autosaves.
Yeah.
And while I think that's probably true, I think that's actually a thing I struggle with the cast, is to remember, oh, I have to save on all these games, because that you used to have to always save, like,
Yeah,
explicitly, for a number of reasons, some of which we talked about even in the GTA series. But yeah, you basically had to explicitly save, sometimes at checkpoints, etc. And that's not really a thing anymore in modern game design. When it comes to Pokemon Let's Go, I think the criticism I had was not really for the hardcore gamer. It's more like it's supposed to be bringing in people who played Pokemon Go, and those people don't.
Yeah, the goals were misaligned.
Yeah, presumably don't have any expectations of saves, and all their experience with Pokemon is it's saved to the cloud continuously.
Yeah.
So that was the mismatch there.
Right. It's like the opposite, in fact. Pokemon Go is like the best example of a save system in a way.
Yeah, it's completely disconnected.
You
Yeah,
don't have to think about it. Yeah, that's a good point. That connection is weird. I mean, I think we talked about this when you brought it up originally, but for me, I'm okay with the choice. It was just the usability of it. There was no feedback. Even if they said we're not doing this, I would probably be okay with it. I'd be like, well, that's weird, but the fact that they don't tell you,
right,
is really the problem, and that's just a weird choice. Like, even if you're building it for the hardcore, there's no reason why you can't even tell the hardcore that you're not doing it.
Yeah, sure.
Or anybody. It's just a messaging problem that is pretty simple to then another callback to Kingdom Hearts, which is weird, is like they explicitly tell you better be saving as you go.
Right.
But then if you die, they have a continue that is essentially like a checkpoint.
Yes.
So it's just like, okay. So I guess they have checkpoints.
Yeah.
So it's weird. Like on this topic, a weird one.
Yeah, that may be more of a. You're gonna want, if you ever get to the point where you are at a place where the checkpoint, proceeding for the checkpoint is too hard, and you want to grind, you want to have saved, because.
Sure, yeah.
Having saved, you can get back to the gummy ship and therefore go anywhere and grind.
Yeah, it's definitely not the same thing as an autosave. No, I definitely know that. I was just surprised when I died once. It kind of started me back at the beginning of the room. And
Right.
I thought it would have just asked me to reload, so I thought I'd lost more time. But
Yeah. No, and that's a weird disconnect from Final Fantasy games. Yeah, I mean, it's all of this stuff really is expectation management. I mean, if you had in Pokemon Let's Go, as you're walking out of the house, your mother calls out to you and says, "Oh, hey, remember that you have to save. I want to hear how you're doing," and treat it like, "Oh, it's a letter you're writing to me. Just do this," and tells you what to do, like it does with so many other things.
yeah, that's a
Like,
good point.
you know,
Yeah.
it's very clear about like, oh, here's what you do to catch the Pokemon. Here's what you do this is where you go to do this. I mean, it's just like, it's always telling you this stuff.
They already have
And
a mechanic for it. Yeah.
yeah. And this one, they just don't, they just, it's
Mhm.
just like, don't tell you at all. But I agree. I mean, I do agree with Raymond that for the most part, I just don't even think about it anymore. I just assume if I'm playing on a modern console that it's just going to save continuously. Anything with a hard drive basically is, you know, how
There's just certain things that have become part of expectation that you just have to be careful when. I mean, trust me, we talk about it. Brett and I probably talk about it every day. It's like you're constantly trying to figure out and make decisions on if you are going to buck a trend or do something against what has become sort of the norm or the expectations. You have to really be doing it with intent and for a good reason, because there's really no reason to change that paradigm unless you really have a have a reason to. So,
and you have to be careful about how much you're going to change, right?
Yeah.
So you have to pick your battles too, because it becomes cognitive overload, as far as a player goes. Oh no, I know. I know. All right, I have one here from Ben Zog. He says, fellow Pokemaniacs. So this one is not as long. He got the clue from me reading like 3 of his 17 bullet points. Just a few cleanup items. One, Newslock, which Gothic Chocobo had referred to in his email last week, is a self-imposed challenge. You catch only the first Pokemon you encounter in an area, and anytime a Pokemon faints, you have to release it.
What?
So that's basically a challenge, that a way you play the game.
What?
But it's self-imposed.
So, I'm trying to think that through for a second. So you only ever have one Pokemon at a time?
No, when you encounter in an area. So like a major screen.
Okay, so that's the only way you can build out your crew, you're saying, but then if it faints, you have to let it go.
An area would be like Route 2 or Route 10 or such and such town or whatever.
Oh man.
Yeah. So you only catch the first one in each area, and then anytime a Pokemon faints, you have to get rid of it. So I assume to the point where you have none, and then I guess you have to go to a new area. I don't know how that works.
I love it. A game has become a thing when there's meta rules being created like that
have names that are obscure, like Newslock.
Yeah, what the heck does that name mean?
I don't even.
Newslock.
Newslock-y? I don't know. 2, stat buffs, debuffs. PvE and PvP are 2 very different games within Pokemon. In PvE, there's almost no reason to not just attack as much as possible. PvP is where stat changes actually come to life.
That makes
not
sense.
Surprising. Yeah,
that makes sense.
And then 3, autosave. You made a great point about new gamers, tying in with Raymond here, about new gamers coming from Pokemon Go expecting autosave. However, every game that uses autosave tells you it does and says not to turn off the game when a certain symbol displays. Am I just old/paranoid that even in autosave games, I always make a manual save before turning off? ?
No, we do.
Yeah,
too.
again, I mean, we talked about this with Raymond. It's not the gamers that I worry about here. It's the people they're trying to bring in. So they won't know that it tells you that it's gonna, that it's gonna autosave, and to, if that's your first console game, then. Anyway, looking forward to Kingdom Hearts. I love the 2 PS2 games when they came out. However, a few months ago, I picked up the collection that contains those games on PS4, and I just could not get back into Kingdom Hearts 1. It has me worried that I'm going to have the same feeling for Kingdom Hearts 3. Thanks, Ben from Iowa. Zhao. Sorry, I messed it up again at the beginning. I mispronounced it. Yeah, I'm really curious. I mean, I hope that Kingdom Hearts 3, it's something we may talk about towards the end of this series. We haven't discussed doing a bonus episode or anything. I really hope that people who've been waiting for this third title in this kind of main arc. Even though it's not really the third, it's like the 11th. Or don't even get me started. It's very complicated. There's like mobile games. There's handheld games. There's the console games. It's a very confusing timeline, and like how much lore you get from different ones. I do hope that pays off for people who have been waiting. I'm very curious to see what the reception is. It's weird that it's coming out on a Friday too. That's an unusual release.
So was 2 also on PS2?
Yes, I believe it was.
Okay, and there wasn't anything on PS3 then.
Well,
some of these weird offshoots.
I think there was a remix or something like that.
I'll look it up.
I don't actually remember, but at the time there was, 2005 was Kingdom Hearts 2, and that was on the PS2. But then there's Chain of Memories, which was in 2004, and that was a GBA game. And then...
No, don't go down this hole. Don't do it. Don't just stop right there.
Right? And so there were like remixes. 1.5 remix was on PS3.
Yeah, but it was still 1. Yeah.
Well, sort of. So
what? All right.
You're right. That's what I mean. It's like, well, it's more complicated than that. It's a whole thing. So we will see. Yeah, I don't know where that's going to go.
Yeah.
Okay, I want to let you get to your ferry. So I'm just going to do this last thing, which is a singing review. Because we love those. So this one's interesting. It's because it's someone who sent one in who had a review previously, and then went back and updated their review to have have lyrics. And so,
of course they did.
Of course they did.
Good for them.
Yeah, good for Ryan. Biostats on the stream. Okay, so here is that. Been away, haven't played this in a while. Brett and Tim explain how it changed the style and what they think. Bringing insight, experience, things don't seem the same since this game's release. So let's play it again, 'cause its impact remains. They ain't just good games, they're all great games. There's only Brett and Tim, and they're just DGC. Geez, Brett's throwing back to a system with a tray. How about you? Have you got a way to play? These devs care about this influential game, but now Tim's lagging behind and works to blame. So let's play it again, 'cause its impact remains. They ain't just good games, they're all great games. There's only Brett and Tim, and they're just DGC. Geez, Yeah, I'm doing my best with the melody.
That was pretty good.
It's not a song I know, so I listened to it a bunch of times, and even I still can't. No,
I'm impressed. I was actually sort of mouthing along with you and singing in my head with the originals. That was well done and very difficult.
It is a pastiche,
especially when you don't know it.
Yeah, of Dave Mason's. We Just Disagree. So.
Yeah, which I knew, but Brett didn't know. So
Ryan tried to pick something that he told me on stream would fit, or actually, no, I think in the email, in a vocal range I would be comfortable with, he said.
Oh, that's nice. No, I don't. Audience, I don't think you get it. You're not supposed to go easy on Brett. That's not.
Wait a minute! Don't listen to this man. Pay no attention to the man behind the curtain.
It's the opposite. Anyway.
Okay.
Nice. Well done.
Thank you very much. That, of course, was via the podcast app /iTunes or however you put in those Apple reviews. We do appreciate that, and we appreciate that, Ryan. And I will sing anything, no matter how ridiculous it makes me sound. And now I'm really opening myself up. There were a lot of people who were like, you should do the Pokemon rap. I'm like, I'm not doing the Pokemon rap. You have to write something set to the Pokemon rap. Okay.
They just want you to sing songs now.
They just want me to sing my part on the show instead of
not even just a review. Just, hey, can you sing this one song?
Can you just sing the song? We're curious. Yeah. Anyway. Okay, I was just quickly looking up what we should play through next. Okay, so you have to finish Wonderland. You didn't quite get through it. But we have Olympus Coliseum. I think we're going to try to do 5 this time, just because I'm a little worried about maybe having to grind a little bit at the end. I want to leave you time. So we're going to do 5 more levels, starting with the Olympus Coliseum. And ending, I'm not going to tell you the name of the level because it gives away too much, but ending with the Pinocchio level. And the Pinocchio level is actually one of my favorites. One of the things that's part of this is you're going to return to Traverse Town. So
I figured, yeah.
So there are 4 actual new areas that I want you to go to, starting with Olympus, ending with the Pinocchio. The other 2 are, well, you'll see.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm actually surprised about Hercules, to be honest. So some of it's probably related to the era of Disney too, right? Hercules,
right.
Probably
a lot of them are more recent.
Yeah,
are like more recent.
The new one has Frozen in it, right? I think, and some Pixar
stuff, and so it's definitely interesting. There's a point at which it's like we're basically doing a lot of Traverse Town and going to one other place, and so there's towards the end of the game we'll talk some more about that sort of stuff. But for now, I guess that's going to do it for us. You can catch me streaming the game on the weekends at twitch.tv/Brett Duville, no underscore in there. You can find the podcast at DevGameClub on Twitter or on the web at devgameclub.com. You can, of course, find my co-host at
Tim Longo with the Junior with the JR at the end.
Wow. You've only said it 147 times before now. And this time,
it had to happen one day.
What's my name? But
Tim Longo Jr. with JR at the end. Yeah.
There you go. Have fun playing games and picking on Tim this week. And good night.
Good night.